Hello and welcome to the Just Chatting podcast, part of the Nerds Chatting Network. Just Chatting is a podcast about everyday people and the lives they lead. On this episode, I speak with Alan Hill. I have the privilege to work with Alan at the University of Exeter, but before this, Alan was a military man. He tells me about his career and the communities of the military, Christmas Day presents, and what brings him great joy. Thanks for listening, and if you like this podcast, you might enjoy some of the other shows that are part of the Nerds Chatting Network. Check us out at nerdschatting.com. So we've known each other a couple of years now, but not closely, professionally. So I'm as interested as anyone listening to know the answers to these questions. So I sent you some questions beforehand. Yeah. So what's your name, please?
Alan Hill, and I'm the Chief Information and Digital Officer for the University of Exeter.
Okay, so for anyone that doesn't understand what that is, because I understand what that is perfectly, but for anyone listening who doesn't understand what that is, what is that, Alan?
Well, obviously, University of Exeter's 25,000 users, so 20-odd thousand students, 4,500 staff, and the provision of the IT and the digital services for all those people is what we do.
As a sales pitch, I really liked it.
That's good,
really,
I got it.
Yeah.
And you play a key role in this activity.
Yeah, thank you
really
very much.
Role.
Yeah, less of the listeners.
In fact, you're probably the most important person in the whole.
Thank you very much. Yeah, money's in the post. Yeah, cool. So, you're not from Exeter though, so can we go all the way back? Tell me about where you grew up and where you're from.
Okay, so you can tell by broad Scottish accent
Yes.
that I was born in Glasgow. Now, my parents moved out of Belfast. They grew up in Belfast and married in Belfast, and moved out just before the Troubles sort of really kicked off.
Yeah.
They moved to Glasgow. One of my brothers and I were born then. We lived there, I think, for about sort of 4 years.
Right.
And then we moved down to sort of North Bristol, been North Bristol and South Bristol as a family, and then I actually live in Wiltshire, just outside Rawwood and Bassett, at the foothills of the Marlborough Downs.
So all over British Isles.
Well, yeah, kind of. The kind of interesting part, though, is that in particular Glasgow, I still use that as people say, where you're from. I say I'm from Scotland. Yeah. Right. Only because it justifies my sort of tight nature when it comes to money.
Okay.
But it's a really interesting thing. I was back in Scotland about maybe 5 years ago, and I rang my mum up early in the morning, about sort of 7 in the morning, and said, where was it that I was born? Because at my age, which remains a state secret,
21, I thought you said.
28.
Oh, sorry.
It was quite normal for you to be born at home,
sure.
not in a hospital.
Sure, okay.
So my mum gave me the address, and I ran from the hotel I was staying in through Glasgow city centre, out through a place called Springburn, where this is 6, 7 in the morning, something like that, where I have to say there was a lot of people on the streets still drinking strong lager.
Wow. I
ran through that and got to the next sort of part of the city called Bishop Briggs, where it was all terribly neat, quite small houses, semi-detached houses, but terribly neat, well laid out, prim and proper.
Right.
And that's where I was born.
So do you have much of a memory from that place? If you're only there for a
Not
few
really,
years?
although we did go back a lot of family and friends up there.
Yeah. So you would say the Wiltshire was more sort of where you consider
kind of,
home?
Yeah, I feel myself as a Wiltshire person predominantly,
Yeah.
and that's where I've spent a lot of my my working life as well.
Right, okay. So that's where you went to school? Sort of
I went to
school
school
life
in
for you?
Bristol.
All right.
So I was one of 5 children.
Wow, that's big.
Which it was a big family.
Yeah.
I'm the second eldest, and my parents gave up an awful lot to send us all to private schools, and so I went to private school in Bristol, Queen Elizabeth's Hospital, where I did my sort of secondary and education up to A level.
Enjoy it?
Nope.
No, what didn't you like?
I don't particularly like academia.
Which is ironic considering
Which
your job
is kind
now,
of ironic,
yeah.
So I didn't particularly like that. Interestingly, though, of course, when I finished school, I had a place at Leicester University of Electrical Engineering, and I was really struggling, to think, could I really face this? So I joined the army instead as an officer, and in a couple of years later, they sent me back to university, Cranfield University, at the Royal Military College of Science.
Whereabouts was that, sir?
At Shrivenham, again in just Wiltshire, Oxfordshire border.
Right.
So that's a 3-year degree, but it's a military establishment. So you attend in jacket and tie and grey flannels, and you will attend and you will hand the work in on time. That's a good learning environment for me.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. When you're told to.
When I'm told to.
So, like, okay. So
I then went back again later, years later, to a residential master's degree there as well.
all right. Okay.
So I've been very fortunate
Yeah.
for 4 years worth of higher education, in effect, within the army.
So you've hit on something which I was very keen to ask you about, because I know you as an ex-military man, but I have no context for that other than I know you were in the army and I know you used to be a brigadier. Or does that
That's right.
rank stay with you, or how does that work? Talk to me a bit about the army, if that's okay.
Okay, so the army is a very tribal organisation, right? If you want to, very, very tribal, and it forms one sort of homogenous grouping called the British Army.
Right.
The tribe I was in was called the Royal Corps of Signals, and they specialise in IT, communications, so radio, satellite, everything in that range. And we basically, our role is to support all the fighting forces and logistic forces with all the kind of communications that they need. So when I started, that was very much focused on radio. We then had a bit of satellite coming in, a little bit of data coming in. Now it's very, very heavily IT orientated, almost right down to forward operating base, the front trench on the soldier.
Right.
I mean, the technology change has been fascinating in that environment. So that has... the army as a grouping is sort of very tribal and so on and so forth. When it's on operations and operating with the RAF and the Navy in what's called a joint environment, it forms a really potent force, and it's a fantastic place to work within. So my career, if you like, formed in a couple of phases within the army, but
Can you talk me through those? So, like, where you started and...
I joined from school,
yeah.
basically. Went to Sandhurst, and then did several years as a young officer, doing effectively line command, so small groups of soldiers, 30 strong soldiers. My first tour after commissioning was in Northern Ireland, in Londonderry, which is a very interesting experience. And of course, my parents, having come from Belfast, I understood, or certainly had a sense of, the kind of deeply embedded difficulties and challenges about people's perceptions, about religion, about political beliefs, and about how all that sort of mashes together, including criminality, to give you what was a really difficult area in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and of course now, only since the peace process, has it begun to peter down, when now Belfast is a tourist attraction.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So, and that was that phase of my army career is about leadership in challenging environments, multinational environments, multicultural environments as well. It's about technology in the battlefield. So technically very wide-ranging, radio, satellite, electronic countermeasures, so jamming, the enemy's signals, and IT, and just starting to get a little bit of cyber, starting to think around in there, network exploitation, that kind of area. But there's also a very interesting role with COVID operations in Northern Ireland, using bleeding edge technologies. And I mean bleeding edge technologies, technologies that save lives, right? And helping COVID operations. I'm not a COVID operator myself. It's far too scary for me. But enabling technology for them to take out onto the streets to effectively prevent terrorism and save lives. And that was a very influential time, 2 years. We spent doing that. My wife accompanied me there, and that put us right at the heart of what was a really challenging set of situations. And of course, many soldiers have been there, and many have lost their lives, and it's been very challenging for the communities at the same time. But from my perspective, it was a fascinating time to be there, where we made a real difference to people.
Community was something interesting. We started a conversation the other morning. One of our other colleagues was talking about their kids, and you were telling me about how communities work in the army, and how families come together, and that's a unit there. So did you find that, how am I wording this? Were there any challenges there about having that community there and then coming back to England, or?
Yeah, because you live outside in the community.
Yeah.
Right? It's what we call outside the wire.
Right. Okay.
So that has security implications, which means you need to, check under your car every morning. You need to look under your car physically,
Right.
look under it. And if you've been shopping before you get back in it, you look under your car for car bombs, that kind of thing. And
Pretty
people get used to
stressful,
that. People get on and do it. And bear in mind, if you're a policeman, you're living in the same, the same situation, or part of the judiciary or whatever. So that produces pressures. And in fact, literally the peace process broke during one stage whilst we were there in the 90s, middle to late 90s, and where we lived in Lisbon, which is actually a reasonably stable and safe place, and we lived near to the base. Actually, there was huge riots that were blocking the roads, that were burning the cars and everything, and actually for families to try and get through that is very challenging.
Yeah, trying to have an everyday life, an ordinary life.
That puts a lot of pressure on army families, but army families are about community.
Yeah.
So if you are all living in the same place, you are working together and living together. The kids are going to the same schools together very often. And then if you then move into another community, you can pick up there quite fast. The interesting challenge is when you leave a military community and live in your own house.
Yeah.
Nobody understands you at that point. So if your partner, your husband or your wife disappears for 6 months on an operation, people don't understand how to interact with that. How does that feel? What do you do? Do you offer help, or is that insulting? And people don't really know how to interact it. And that's one thing we noticed when we moved out of army community, and we lived in our own house for a period of time. Is that was a very interesting dynamic which we hadn't seen before. But army is about community, and that's what holds people together when the times get really tough, when they start losing people on operations or whatever. It's the families, it's the community that bind it together.
Do you still have links to those communities in the past? I mean, where you came through the ranks and things like that. Do you have?
It's very interesting. People in the military are not normally what we call tightly bonded. I'm not ringing you up every week, but I might see you in 3 years' time. I haven't seen you for 3 years, but it's like yesterday. We know everything. There's a common culture, there's a common way of working, there's a common language, and you can pick it up. And I was down at Wyvern Barracks the other day, an event down there in another capacity, and I bumped into a guy I haven't seen for probably 10 years. But he and I both served in the same squadron, which was an Arctic Warfare Squadron. And we're immediately there, together.
Yeah.
And that's just how it works. So during that phase in particular, that sort of initial phase I was telling you about,
yes.
if we end up by saying I was commanding officer of a signal regiment, it's like 600 strong, where that's, if you like, head of that community. Really getting ourselves ready for operations. We're in high readiness, and we went to Iraq during that time as well for about 6 months.
So it's the same group of people moving from...
Yeah, picking up, we were based in Bulford.
Yeah.
We didn't all go, but a good proportion of us went to Iraq, leaving the families at home.
Okay. And how's that work? Because I'm very naive about how things like that work. Is it... There are obviously army transports and things you all pick up and go at the same time, or you have them shipped in over months?
It depends. I think we would sort of do a 2-week phased handover. Right. So the initial party would go out. I think I went out on one of the very early stages, and then I take over from my opposite number, and then the next group come out, and then if you're going out onto some other base, you'll go forward and do a handover and then come back. And it's all sort of planned, and you'll trump up to Brize Norton in Oxfordshire, wait there for hours and get on a RAF transport plane and fly out and land in the desert, and then your 6 months begins. And bear in mind, we prepared people, put a lot of work into preparing them for combat and technical skills. So, when they get there, they're ready to go. But, the question's really around community. That's how we get on operations. What you've just left behind is your family for 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's difficult.
So, okay, let's go. Let's. I think some of the really interesting stuff is going to be the career and the tours you've been on and stuff. If you don't mind talking about some of that.
Yep.
So, you're in Ireland, Northern Ireland for a little bit.
I think I did about 3 years in Ireland on and off, different guises.
Okay.
So, and very interesting to see how that has now worked out.
Okay.
So through political will, probably brought about by military action. So military action puts people in a position where they need to negotiate.
Was there any learning curve there in that? See, my naivety, apologies, for the army is that you fight another army. There's a war, or there's a battle, or in Ireland you're fighting terrorism. Is that a very different mindset shift?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a completely different mindset shift. British Army developed masses of experience about fighting terrorism at relatively small scale. I'm going to map it across to the Taliban in a minute.
Right? I'm interested in that.
Okay, and we got really, really good at this by closing the enemy down. Right, remember you're looking for people who they all look the same. Everybody looks the same. You can't say he's dressed like that. He's got the wrong uniform on. He's part of the enemy. They're not. These people are part of the community.
Yeah.
Right, and don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that the Northern Ireland is just it's all bad and
no.
It's got some fascinating history, which is would never fit in the time of this, right? But what the British have done to the Irish is not good, and what Northern Irish terrorism has done to the community and to the mainland is not good, right? So there's no right and wrong in this, but what we do know is terrorism is wrong. Okay, so close it down with military action, huge amount of effort to put it in a position where it's got nowhere else to go other than to negotiate. At that point, the politicians then step in and through all sorts of shenanigans get to something like the Good Friday Agreement. Okay, and at that point, of course, where they're saying, right, we'll release prisoners. And of course, most of the military say, oh, no, you won't. Not a chance, because he's the person that shot, him and, blew my friends up or whatever.
So there's an emotional impact there.
Absolutely.
Right.
So most of the military would be going, no way. But it's not a military decision, it's a political decision at that time. One thing I did learn, looking back with hindsight, is actually, the role of politics in a campaign is very, very important. If you just leave it to the military, we will close with and kill the enemy. And we'll try and rebuild stuff. But the political solution is what's needed at the end of that. So lot on Northern Ireland. During the second Iraq War, I served with the Americans for a period of time, and that saw me in Tampa, Florida, as part of the coalition headquarters there, Central Command, and then out to the Middle East on a sort of almost a weekly basis, but involving the Polish as part of the coalition and how they're going to fit in with the South Koreans, the Japanese you oversaw as well, and so how they integrate into that coalition force for that operation. And then I went back to Iraq, as I said, as a commanding officer, and then in various different roles I've been in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan on too many occasions, on short periods.
So did you find any of that coalition, any challenges there, working with the different militaries?
Working with the Americans is an experience because they have sheer mass.
Yeah.
I mean, huge. They can arrive and make things happen in a way which is just incredible. Or working with somebody like the South Koreans who work completely and utterly differently, and you have to adjust and learn how to, and work with the local armies, with the Iraqi armies. During that tour of Iraq, I did a role for. So the British general, a chap called Richard Sharef, was the divisional commander. Basically, the whole of southern Iraq was, by and large, under control of the British, of which we had an Italian brigade up in sort of the middle ground. And the Italians were handing the Dikar province back to the Iraqis to take back control, and the governor was there and the military was there. And my role was to help enable that to happen in a space of about 6 weeks. So to help negotiate the handover of what's called the security file, which is actually the security portfolio, into the hands of the Iraqis, make sure that they deconflicted with the Americans, who were also there, part of the big logistic base there, and we also had Romanian forces, and I think Estonian and Iraqi forces, and to work out how that's all going to work, and how the Iraqis are going to take control of somewhere where the Americans are present. Because and do they know how to operate, and can they liaise with them so we don't have a sort of blue on blue?
Yeah. That was a phrase that came up quite a lot, I think, in the news.
Well, that's when friendly force fire hits your own forces. So that was a fascinating time. Nothing to do with communications or IT or anything like that. It was about handing over security to the Iraqis. So working with them, with the Iraqis is not about the British Army controlling the Iraqi army. We contained what went on. to allow them to find their own feet to get themselves back going again and take control with their pride and their self-esteem.
Oh, aircon's just gone off. That'll probably be on
Yeah.
on the audio. So I've got a couple of questions that come out of that. Something that's two things that have come to mind as you were talking there. Did you find there were like any major language barriers going on there? Was there a common language, or was there a common military language that you used, or how did that?
So
all work?
English tends to be the language of operations.
Yeah. Do you think that's because of the mass, maybe, of Americans?
It just tends to. NATO operations are always done in English,
Right.
And even the French will speak English occasionally as well. But use of translators is very important.
Yeah.
So I was in a fantastic meeting once, and I remember this vividly. And it was a meeting between the Italian brigadier and the local governor. They were talking about the handover, and I was there assisting in helping facilitate it. And imagine those two sat together, and the Italian brigadier has got a Italian to Arabic translator. The Iraqi governor has got an English to Arabic translator. And I've got an Italian to English translator.
Okay.
So I asked the question, I don't know, the question is, so shall we do it this way? And the answer gets translated twice to English to Italian and English to Arabic, and then Italian to Arabic, and then the answer gets given, and then it comes back. And if you ask the question 3 times and you get 2 answers the same, it's a deal. I didn't speak Arabic.
No, indeed.
But
yeah.
it would have been helpful if I spoke Arabic or Italian.
Yeah.
Neither.
Is there any push in the army or in the military that you know of to have, multilingual?
Yeah. Actually, there is in about 5 years ago. New Chief of General Staff who heads up the army started laying down that you must have a second language now to progress brass major.
Okay.
For example, you've got to have a second language, and I think it's absolutely right. So my second language is French. I don't speak it very well, but it's useful enough to get by.
Yeah.
And I do think it's really important.
And so my second point on the stuff you were talking about before, where you're talking about containing situations and all those different almost conflicting priorities and different armies. How is that pressure? How do you feel about that? How does that make you feel when you're on the ground and you've got to do that? How do you deal with that?
I think you rely on your instincts a lot. I mean, you hear about training kicking in and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's very good for well-rehearsed, practiced responses to things. But at the end of the day, one of the things that the army teaches you to be and encourages you to be is think independently and react and, think on your feet under pressure. And of course, all the training is about, putting you under pressure to help you realise how to respond in that environment, how to sort of draw calm in the face of chaos, and to use well-trodden techniques like, looking at a problem, working through, you might have heard me say, do an estimate where we're going to look at a factor, so what, working your way through, and from that you can help form a plan, and then you write it down in a set way which helps make sure you've covered everything coordinating, and then it starts to make sense to people. Because you have to communicate the problem and the solution, the plan, to everybody sat in front of you. And by using well-practiced techniques that people are familiar with and frameworks are familiar with, the take-up and the understanding of that becomes really fast. So, for example, we'll look at a problem like we might do here in Extra IT, and we'll look at the factors associated with it and say, so what? And we'll try and make deductions all the way through, come up with a plan, then we'll talk to people about it, and we'll socialise it with people. Then we'll do something like we'll war game it, and you might have heard that phrase in the last few weeks over a couple of big operations. I was going to say big couple of IT operations we're about to do as we launch new applications. We're going to sit down and we're going to work out if I do follow this plan, what could go wrong? And people then challenge you, say, well, this might happen to you. How would you react? And does your plan allow you to do that? Do you need to change your plan? Keep testing and testing and testing and developing it until you get the plan, which is as resilient as you possibly can. You write it out and then you rehearse it, okay? Tabletop exercise until everybody understands what they're doing. Because there's one thing we know about a plan is as soon as you have anything to do with the enemy, your plan's blown apart. Okay, first contact with the enemy, your plan's gone. But because you understand how everything is going to work together, you understand intent, you understand limitations and constraints about what you can and can't do in that operational environment, then it all works together remarkably well. And we bring some of that inside within Extra IT and how we plan things and how we operate.
So that would lead me on to a question about how you feel. I think there's still, your career in the military is an untapped mine of conversation.
Of stories.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But do you, leading on from what you've said there, do you think that your career, your experience in the military has tailored the way you think and the way you act, and then your career after that? It seems like it has.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
After 32 years, it can't but influence. And I think the thing here is the military's got a lot of very positive points that are worth keeping. I mean, it's got some bad points as well, you know. But it's about taking the good things and using those in a positive way. And the military trains you in a lot of very good positive things, which are highly valuable to people as well. And you look at the number of veterans who are employed in lots of different jobs. There are a number in the university now. They bring a lot to the university in different ways. And I think that's very powerful. There's an interesting thing that, you know, the army are often, I use the army, but the military are often seen as either heroes or victims. Have you heard that?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's either help for heroes, you know, or, you know, great success in operations, absolute superheroes. And we have that end of the spectrum, but all that group of people, the normal people, if you like, in the middle, have so much to offer outside of the military, those skills. And actually, one of the things we work hard on, one of the things I'm working with the University Officer Training Corps here in Exeter, is to help translate those skills into employability things,
Right.
to enhance employability.
That's great.
So, you know, team building, problem solving, right? You know, written on your CV, age 19 or 20, is surely powerful. You know, those are important skills. So the latter part of my career in the army, that took me up to sort of commanding officer, was been more strategic roles. And that's really about quite a lot of planning, UK global operations for the digital and IT support. So if we're going to have, as in a role where at the Permanent Joint Headquarters in Watford, which is controls all the UK operations around the world, and planning for the IT support for wherever we're going, you know, going to whatever country, wherever the submarines are going or the Air Force is going, supporting them. That was really fascinating to see it at a sort of strategic level.
And so I suppose that reduced the amount of tours and things you'd have to go out on, or were you
No,
local?
I ended up out quite,
Oh, really?
you know, week at a time, different places. But yeah, but it was a fascinating area to watch as a campaign was starting to, you know, Afghanistan was starting to build. Then it was really starting to kick off and watch, and Iraq was starting to close down a little bit. That was really interesting. At the same time, we had other stuff. We had piracy going on, you know, off Somalia. And this headquarters involved in making sure that the UK element was ready to deal with piracy. Well, what do we know about piracy? You know, other than Johnny Depp and Pirates of the Caribbean, which apparently wasn't really relevant, but wasn't even true, apparently.
I think it's 300 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was a fascinating time. And I did that for about 2 years or so. And then I moved to be a brigade commander. That's about 3,000 members of staff. Right. About 7 signal regiments altogether. So remember, I was a commanding officer of a signal regiment. If you put a lot of signal regiments together, you get a brigade.
Sure.
Okay. And that was basically preparing people to operate under really stressful situations in Afghanistan, both from a technical point of view, but combat skills as well. So we prepared people to go to do the force protection in Kabul. So we'd have a squadron up there who would get everybody around the city. So combat skills, right? Driving armoured vehicles, getting senior staff, you know, senior members of the military, senior members of the political environment around the city safely. At the same time, we got units down in the rest of Afghanistan, in Helmand, supporting all the infantry on the ground with communications, either small satellite devices with small IT setups across it, and these guys are right in the forward operating bases and all the way back to the main headquarters, and getting them ready and then rotating them every 6 months through.
what was the quality of the technology like there? Like, because I don't know if this is a myth or not, but I'm always led to believe that war or the military without war drives technology innovation. Would you say that's true? Did you have things
no,
that were
it used to be,
right?
but technology is moving at such a pace now that actually we don't sort of design stuff ourselves any longer. We just go and buy the best you can get.
Right.
But bear in mind, military communications. I was trying to create a representation of this to people. It's a bit like having mobile phone masts, right, in the city of Exeter, but you sort of drive them around and set them up every 24 hours,
Okay.
and then you move them again.
Right.
As the tourists move sort of further down towards Cornwall.
Yeah.
But of course, this is done now so we'd use big satellites and create the network link back to the UK via satellite link.
Sure.
Where we've got a military satellite fleet in the in the atmosphere, Skynet 5 as was then. And suddenly you've got to really start to understand what that really means and how you manage satellite bandwidth, because now we're going very data hungry applications over relatively narrow satellite bandwidths, because it's not like BT broadband, other providers are available
Very good.
to the house. It's not like that at all.
No.
And actually, here's the really important thing. Sandstorms in the desert happen quite a lot. Heavy rain as well. That wipes out satellite communications.
Okay. What? Because of the density of
Density of
particles
sand,
and
yeah,
things?
you just can't get them through. You can't get the microwaves through. So you
Right.
can see, you can drop all comms to the UK if a sandstorm hits.
Yeah.
So you've got to be able to operate autonomously from that and design it. So that's not cutting edge technology. That's using good commercial technology, but using it differently.
Right.
So we did quite a lot of that as the brigade command, and that was based up in Telford in Shropshire.
Okay.
Somewhere further in the Midlands.
North of Bristol.
North of the M4, but not as far as Glasgow.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Okay.
After that, I became the de facto Chief Information Officer for the British Army. So that's really about driving IT and digital and use of information in a far more effective and dynamic way. And actually, information is the heart of everything the military does. It might be intelligence, it might be data of some sort. It could be logistics information. But the army is getting to grips with what that meant for the way it operated. We see that now in every sort of customer journey we do. Be Amazon online shopping, be buying from Argos catalogue. That's two suppliers. I'll get some more going.
Yeah.
Marks and Spencers. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
That is information based. And this was about making sure we could drive digital innovation, making sure we could do even things like making a 3,000 strong headquarters far more efficient through business process management technology.
Right, okay.
And that was a really fascinating time. I even stayed there an extra year actually because it was that interesting. And making sure that the British Army, when it is ready for getting it ready to deploy, all its information assets were ready, the troops were trained, that we had the right stuff, we had the right satellite, making it all work like that. So really, professionally, really rewarding.
That's an incredibly prestigious post. I mean,
I don't think it. No, it wasn't.
That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Did you feel it was? Because if I said to someone, I work with the guy that used to be the head of IT for the entire British Army, that sounds fantastic.
It didn't feel. It doesn't feel like that.
No, that's what I mean. How does it feel?
I think the context for me is we did a CIO UK entry, which is like a magazine, an organisation for chief information officers, and they do have a top 100 in the UK.
Right.
And we came out 7th due to transformational stuff in 2014 or thereabouts. So I think that I began to realise actually we were doing something which really interested people. And your listeners can go and read a couple of articles. You can put them on the.
I'll link them below. Yes, yeah.
Of an interview that I did with the editor Mark Chillingworth of CIO magazine before that particular thing, to bring to life what IT was in a military context.
Sure.
So we went on to Salisbury Plain, which is in Wiltshire, a big army training area, where there was a battalion out training to go to Afghanistan. And they had all the armoured vehicles. They were out in forward operating bases. Their helmets, body, the full works. This is their final exercise before deploying on live operations. And he got to see at first hand what it meant, including simulated rocket attacks, etc., etc., which was quite amusing. And you got
what does that entail? How does that look?
well, a real rocket attack or a simulated rocket.
A bit of both. You tell me about both.
Real rocket attacks are not fun.
No, I imagine not.
And I think partly because of the random nature of these rockets, the insurgents put them in metal tubes, point them in a general direction, and sort of like the touch paper, as it were.
Right.
And of course, they can land fairly randomly. There's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
You just hit the deck and hope for the best. Try and get under cover. What you don't do is stand up looking at them coming in because of the way shrapnel bursts. Okay. They can seriously disrupt operations because you don't know what's going to happen. Whereas a simulated one is just, you create a very, very loud bang, right, and everybody hits the deck. But what's interesting? It's this training thing again about loud bang, hit the deck. Don't do anything else. Don't say, oh, was that a rocket? Just hit the deck, because if it lands sort of like within 100 metres of you, and the shrapnel goes out at sort of just off horizontal, it'll hit you if you stood up. And that's why you train people time and time and time again. If you hear either the rocket alarm or a rocket or an explosion, you just immediately hit the deck. And that's what, in this instance, they were doing. He was in a suit, by the way. Not cool. But there's really interesting articles written on it. And I'll get you the link to that, because I think I find it quite interesting reading it, actually, yeah. But from that point of view. But, this aspect now, and I just go back to my time in Basra around rocket attacks, where I was there at a time when it was probably the most intensive rocket attacks in volumes that were going on, and those battalions who were in the city themselves really took a hammering from mortar attacks, to the point where they got a load of breeze blocks in, and what we called the coffins, where you'd lay them by your sleeping bag and you put breeze blocks either side. In case, as the mortars come in, they would burst, and then the breeze blocks would hopefully protect you. If they landed in the breeze blocks, clearly that wasn't, good.
Pretty hard to sleep in that environment, I imagine.
I think people get kind of used to it, but yes, the alarms goes off, you hit the deck, you roll off your bunk onto the floor, and wait to see what happens. And then on Christmas Day, this is like a rocket story, but a Christmas story with a happy ending.
Okay. Fireworks and things at the end, right?
Fireworks and things at the end. On Christmas Day, I think it was broadcast on television that it was Christmas Day, and the tradition is for the officers and the senior NCOs to serve Christmas dinner to the soldiers. Okay, and it's kind of well known. It was probably on the BBC at the time, and they might have been showing it live. Needless to say, now we had dinner. We had served dinner slightly early, and all the soldiers had eaten. They just cleared the cookhouse, so eaten centrally in a big sort of big tent, mess tent. And the officers and seniors, we were just clearing up. There was like food on the floor and stuff, custard and Christmas cake and everything on the floor. And the rockets came in because they knew we were all centrally gathered at that time. So we all hit the deck. Well, I was covered in custard and gravy and everything.
Funny now.
Funny in hindsight. No, I think that was the case. One rocket did go through the cookhouse on that particular thing, but nobody was hurt. But we got the shrapnel back in the afternoon. The shrapnel ring. So if you imagine a long rocket, I can't remember the dimensions of it. Imagine it like 4 or 5 foot long, okay, and the diameter is probably about a foot. Just use it as that. And there's a large chunk of metal at the front. It's when that explodes, that is the shrapnel which kills and injures people. And there was a ring of metal with sort of shrapnel shards off it. And the weapons intelligence section and the explosive ordnance had been out to recce this, to come back, and they brought this back. So in the evening we could put it on the table and see what they'd thrown at it. That was our Christmas present from the insurgents. Thankfully, on that occasion, nobody was injured.
Excellent. Yeah.
However, clearly it accounted for a number of lives, that kind of thing, in a very intense period.
Comes back to that pressure thing I was saying. Yeah. There's a lot of pressure there on every level there.
And don't forget the families at home
who
see it on the TV.
Yeah. Is there, again, apologies for my naivety on this, but is there contact allowed home, and how does that work?
Yeah, at that time, so we did have internet there, and it is now, but it's obviously controlled to a certain period of time. And you can get phone calls, free phone calls now, of about 20 minutes a week or something like that. You could buy more.
Right.
So that was it. It provided you were near somewhere that could do it. If you're on a forward operating base in some horrible little place with a very small satellite link, that's quite difficult. Yeah. And the other interesting aspect is if there'd been somebody killed or seriously injured in that operational theatre, they would stop all communications home.
Right.
Until the family have been notified.
Okay.
So that's a very stressful time because you see it on the TV. Yeah. The family's home. They see somebody's been killed, British soldiers been killed, whatever. They can't talk to any of the family because we've just closed down all the internet access and all the phone calls until the family of that person that had been seriously injured or killed had been informed.
And that's a respect thing.
That's because what was happening is, of course, they would find out through, channels, and it might be wrong.
Yeah,
might be the wrong information.
Okay.
The person, there's no support around for that family immediately. So that was, but that causes stress in its own right because now you think, well, I haven't heard from anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's sometimes you go 2 days without any communications.
Right.
To family, work communications obviously carry on.
Yeah.
So that was that army role. I think we were talking about, weren't we?
CIA role. Sorry. Sidetracked.
So that the last role I did then. So I moved from there to the Ministry of Defence's IT house, if you like, called Information Systems and Services, based in Corsham near Bath. And there I was. They do the design aspects of new services. They build new services and they operate it. And I was in the operate end. So I was responsible. I was head of the global network operations and cyber defence for the UK military, at home and on operations. So what that is, imagine a big 250 strong, 2-floor, building with huge screens of network diagrams and everything on the end, and we are watching the global networks, making sure they stay up so that all those communications can work from the forward operating base all the way back, and doing the cyber defence for it as well. And that includes everything from fast jets in the air, right, and out to forward operating bases, soldiers on the ground in any part of the world, and ships and submarines under the sea, and making sure that is all working seamlessly for them.
Okay, I can't even imagine how difficult that must be.
It was, it's well established, right? And there's a lot of really, really good people there, mix of military and civilians, right? So we've got all the suppliers are there.
So at that point, are you military or are you a civilian?
Military.
You're still
military, yeah. So there's about, I can't remember the numbers, about 250 people. Probably the majority were military. Right. There's a joint cyber unit, that was half of it. They were doing the cyber defence. Bear in mind, we're not just talking about sort of an internet. We've got an official layer. There's one which is sort of protected, it's secret, and then there's one at top secret, and then you'll find ones that sort of multinational. So 4 separate networks, all requiring different levels of security. And this was really about dealing with at the lowest level where you get a lot of cyber attacks, thousands of security events a week to deal with. And it's really about protecting the Ministry of Defence from like foreign intelligence services who are clearly going to try and get in, and sophisticated criminal attacks as well. Protecting the logistic chain.
So internal, that's internal.
Suppliers.
Is it?
Once they're in, finding them, getting them out, but actually stopping them getting in is important. So that was a really formative, but even though it's the last 18 months of my military career, it was probably the most informative. I learnt huge amounts there, and I brought a lot of that with me to this current role.
Yeah. So from there you came to the University of Exeter?
Directly. Yeah. I finished in something like the 21st of December 2015. I started on the 4th of January.
Wow, not much of a gap.
No, I took off my combat uniform, and I had to find some clothes to wear. Yeah. But I just don't dress as fashionably as you. Obviously.
Yeah. I've been teased today because I'm wearing a waistcoat. I must have a look like Gareth Southgate apparently. So how was that then? How was that shift? Because so you're still in the military, but you're not necessarily going on tours at that point. So maybe that's died down a little bit. But now you've come into a civilian role. Was there a shift there? Did you find that difficult, or was that easy? Or?
My wife recognised there's been a shift.
Yeah.
Yeah. So And I think we as a family recognise there's not that risk of having to uplift all your plans, shift completely and suddenly disappear for periods of time. Because you never know what's going to come up next in the military. Who would have predicted half the things that have gone on, in recent years. So that's been a very positive thing. So stability has been a very, significant bonus to that. It was an easy shift, I have to say. At the University of Exeter, I was warmly welcomed. People really went out of the way to make sure I felt welcomed, and I think that that I was really pleased with that. It has not been the kind of jolt that you might expect.
Yeah, I wondered about that, whether it was there was a hard shift there or not.
No, not really at all. I mean, IT is IT, whether it's in the military or here. It's the users are different, the environment's different, but the problems are very similar. But I think because of the welcoming environment, I mean, we are a university which is very forward-leaning. It's very transformational. It's going at a fair old pace. Well, that kind of sounds familiar territory to me.
Yeah.
In many ways.
High up the rankings, so there's pressure there as well. So, but is that pressure different? Is the challenge different? So IT is IT, but in the military, one of the opening things you said was about these communications tools to keep people alive, to save lives. It's very different here. How has that had to change from you? Have you had to change how you do things, approach things?
There's nothing here which is that important, in relation to that. But of course, within the context of the university, there are things which are really important.
Of course,
We've got, a really key part of our battle rhythm in the university is a thing called confirmation and clearing, which is, as A-level down roads come up and us filling our places. It's a really important business activity, right? Operationally mission critical. Yeah. Well, those are kind of military words, but they apply equally to here because this drives our income. Yeah. And, I don't have to tell you that, but, there's various other times in the diary, online exams, first weeks of term where that is operationally critical. So that's where I think about that now as well. And it's not life-saving, but it is absolutely critical because, what motivates me here and why have I come to Exeter, for example, actually we're doing something which is something I'm really proud to be part of. Educating or enabling students to be educated is a really important thing. When you see some of the research that goes on here, it's phenomenal.
That's
and we have a part have a part to play in that. I used at a CIO dinner a few weeks ago. I said, my job is helping academics find and analyse the atmospheres of exoplanets over 200 light years away. Yeah. They just had to check they were in the right dinner. Helping research into dementia in the over 50s. That's what we do. We only do a small part in it, but it's a superly important part in it. And I think, those are the motivating things for me. Getting kids great education, the best they can get, helping them learn in a way that I didn't get, because you had to learn this way, and that was the only way you can do it, which was why I probably didn't enjoy school quite as much as I could have done. Well, I had to go to Cranfield University as part of a military establishment to make me do it. But, who now wants deeply personalised learning, for you, that turns, if I learn in pictures, it produces everything I need in a picture format, deeply personalised for the individual, an immersive digital environment for you to learn in. That, that's exciting. Yeah. For me, I know that might be a bit sad, but that's exciting.
No, I'm in the same world, so I get it. I do get it, but it's the other end of the spectrum, almost in my mind. The military role is about saving lives, ensuring that terrorism doesn't happen, and fighting battles. This is about starting careers and getting people, getting students into the world of education and starting their lives, giving them an opportunity to. So it's
to do great things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you're still enjoying it here.
I love it here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, there's never a dull moment.
That's a fact.
We've got a great opportunity around digital coming up. It's very exciting. Very exciting. It's never an easy ride, but it's a senior role we do. It's a really important. Digital is at the heart of everything we do. Yeah. There's no doubt about it.
But I don't know. we'll touch on this a little bit, but we spoke, as I said, we spoke the other day with one of our colleagues. Your son is now thinking about army. Is that right?
Yeah, he's a trained combat infantryman in the Rifles Reserve. So he's a reservist. That's the Territorial Army, part-time soldiers.
Sure. Okay.
So he's done extremely well there during his gap year,
Right.
before he goes to university.
Yeah.
And he's had a great time.
Well, that's great to be sort of handing some of that on.
Well, he's done it himself.
Yeah.
My wife and I have been completely sort of, that's his choice.
Yeah.
I would not push him towards the military unless he chose to go.
Yeah.
And he's chosen to do that, and he's having a great time.
Yeah. Cool. I think that's probably a good place to end, unless you think you have any more burning stuff you wanted to say.
You asked me, you've written a question for me here, which you haven't asked, which was about, tell me about something that brings you great joy.
Well, yeah, okay, let's go for it. I didn't know if you wanted. I didn't know if you wanted to touch on that, but let's do it. Okay, so what? So here's the question. I'll pose it to you. Go on.
I said, and the reason that caught my eye is the phrase "great joy."
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is, my wife had an elderly aunt, passed away now many years ago, but she was a nun. Okay, and when we lived in Northern, she eventually moved from various places wherever, and ended up in London. And when we lived in Northern Ireland, I'd fly to. I've been in London quite a lot, and I'd go and visit her, and I would take her just a bunch of flowers from the local flower shop, not big expensive stuff.
Yeah.
And she was such a kind-hearted individual. You could feel the peace, within her. Mm-hmm. And she would say, she said, thank you for those. They will bring great joy to everybody here, and I'll take them downstairs with me. And that sits with me really bizarrely. And I often talk about it with my wife, because actually, from something so simple to have great joy. When we work in the world of highly complex environments, hugely technical, most of it beyond me, but a small bunch of flowers can bring great joy. And then so in that context, the stuff that brings great joy to me, over and above my family, obviously first, is been out in the open, been out in the mountains. So I'd spent about 5 winters in Norway doing Arctic warfare, been on the top of a mountain. I have it pictured in my mind now in about -20, in a trench on the top of a glacier, dressed up in quilts and everything, in a full moon, in almost daylight, in the middle of the night. Beautiful, beautiful place. Or in the Snowdon Mountains, walking with a group of students. When I used to run the Royal Signals Leadership Wing, right on the top of the mountain, wild camping, marvellous things like that. And of course I live near the Marlborough Downs, which if you've ever been on is rolling hills, Bronze Age history in the ground around it. And you can get away from everything there, and you can walk, run, take the dogs, ride horses, or whatever. And it's the quietness and it's the calmness that brings great joy, to that particular opportunity and activity.
Wow. Yeah, I guess that must be because of the contrast of the military career, the pressure, the intensity of that. Even in this role now, there must be it's always go, go, go.
Yeah.
So maybe that's that's lovely.
Well, it's not that nice, but you know what I mean.
Thank you very much, Alan.
You're welcome.
I very much enjoyed this conversation, and I hope the listeners have too. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.